When a street child yelled out a warning, nobody could have predicted what would unfold. The upscale Park Bistro drew the city's wealthy like a beacon, nestled among perfectly trimmed trees, with a nearby fountain providing gentle background music. It was noon, and the establishment pulsed with activity. Servers in pristine uniforms moved elegantly between tables, carrying trays of gourmet meals and freshly roasted coffee. The atmosphere carried scents of warm pastries and the delicate fragrance of flowering plants. Yet for one particular man, none of this registered as extraordinary. Seated at a premium table in the heart of the restaurant was Bernard Green, a figure whose reputation was built on influence and fortune. He had constructed his business empire from nothing, beginning with property investments in his 20s and branching into enterprises most could only imagine. Now at 72, he moved with the assurance of someone who controlled not only his own destiny, but possibly that of those surrounding him. His tailored clothing and gold-framed spectacles spoke of a luxurious lifestyle. However, as he studied the menu, his actions seemed deliberate, almost uncertain. Across from him sat Marissa, his considerably younger spouse, a woman who appeared to have stepped directly from a fashion magazine. Her raven hair complemented features that were flawlessly refined, her crimson lipstick precisely applied. She radiated sophistication from head to toe, yet her smile seemed hollow. She absently twisted a diamond bracelet around her wrist, her focus directed at her mobile device rather than her husband. Close by, a young boy hovered just outside the patio barrier. He appeared smaller than his years, his oversized sweatshirt draped loosely over his slight build. His keen eyes moved from table to table, examining plates and belongings, searching for possibilities. His name was Malik, though none of the cafe patrons recognized him. His presence was known on this block, a child without shelter, perpetually existing on the periphery of discussions and the margins of worry. Bernard checked his timepiece. "You're preoccupied again," he remarked, his tone measured yet direct. Marissa raised her head and smiled, though it lacked genuine warmth. "I'm present," she responded sweetly, extending her hand across the table to touch his. "You understand how much I treasure these meals together." Malik's stomach rumbled. He stepped nearer, his movements nearly soundless, as he positioned himself against the patio barrier. His attention settled on Bernard's table, the type of feast he hadn't observed closely in months, an immaculate white soup bowl, accompanied by fresh rolls and a glass of mineral water. Then something peculiar occurred. As Bernard adjusted his eyewear and retrieved his phone, Marissa's hand moved into her luxury purse. Malik observed her fingers grasp a tiny container. She unscrewed it with a casual motion, angling her hand subtly over the steaming bowl. The substance merged with the soup immediately, vanishing as though it had never existed. Malik's breathing stopped. He remained motionless, watching her mix the soup with her spoon, her expression unchanged. Then she leaned toward Bernard, her voice quiet, but audible enough. "After everything I've endured, you won't sabotage this now." The boy stared, uncertain of what he had just observed. Was this actually happening? Could a woman who appeared so refined, seated in such an elegant establishment, truly be doing what he suspected? Yet Malik couldn't dismiss the sensation that something was terribly amiss. Malik's pulse raced as he crouched lower behind the barrier. He wasn't certain what he'd witnessed, but the manner in which the woman's voice delivered those chilling words sent a tremor through him. He tightened his fists, his fingernails pressing into his skin. Nobody else had observed it. Nobody else had been watching. It was only him. The hollow ache in his stomach reminded him of reality, but his gaze stayed focused on the pair. Bernard appeared weary and distracted, his spoon suspended above the bowl while he checked his device. Marissa had resumed her charming composure, her smile radiant, her hand positioned beneath her chin, as if she hadn't just whispered something menacing moments earlier. Malik sensed the burden of choice weighing upon him. His intuition urged him to leave. Why become involved? Who would trust a child like him? A boy in worn clothing, standing at the boundaries of a world that didn't welcome him? He swallowed nervously, scanning the other customers. Laughter, conversation, the sound of clinking glassware. Nobody cared. Nobody even saw him. But his attention returned to Bernard's spoon, now lowering into the soup. Malik felt his chest constrict. It wasn't his imagination. He had witnessed her add something to it. He understood what would occur if the elderly man took a taste. His mind raced. He didn't know this person, but that was irrelevant. Wrong remained wrong. The moment felt eternal, and then instinctively, Malik pushed away from the barrier and walked directly to the table. His legs felt heavy, yet his feet continued moving. His voice broke as he called out, "Don't eat that!" Heads pivoted. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The sound of a dropped utensil resonated across the café. Bernard froze, his spoon near his mouth, his startled eyes meeting the boy's. Marissa spun around, her expression hardening. "What did you just say?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to slice through silence. Malik didn't waver. His voice trembled, but remained loud enough for everyone to hear. "She added something to your meal. I witnessed it. Don't consume it." Shocked gasps spread through the café as every patron turned toward the unfolding scene. The silence that followed was oppressive. Malik maintained his position, his chest rising and falling as adrenaline surged through him. Bernard blinked, looking between the boy and his spouse. "What is he referring to, Marissa?" His tone remained calm, but his hand shook as he placed the spoon on the table. Marissa's composure fractured like an overstretched elastic band. She jumped to her feet, her chair scraping noisily against the stone surface. "You little fabricator!" she snarled, her voice filled with malice. "How dare you make such a vile accusation? Who permitted you in here?" The insult stung, but Malik didn't retreat. His eyes remained fixed on Bernard, desperate to make him understand the truth. "I witnessed it. She poured something into your soup while you weren't watching," he said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "You can detect the odor if you don't believe me." Bernard's complexion paled as he turned toward his wife, his eyes narrowing. "Marissa, what's happening?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. She scoffed, making a dismissive gesture. "He's simply trying to create chaos. Look at him. He probably just wants money or food." She spat the words like they were toxic, her gaze flicking to Malik with open contempt. But the boy didn't flinch. He stepped closer to the table, his fists clenched. "I'm not lying," he said firmly, his voice rising. "She doesn't want you to realize, but I observed everything." Bernard's hand lingered over the bowl, torn between disbelief and the growing doubt entering his mind. But something in the boy's tone made him pause. The atmosphere around the table seemed to thicken, the once vibrant café now eerily quiet. All eyes were locked on the developing drama, their meals abandoned. Bernard leaned back slightly in his chair, studying the boy with a scrutinizing gaze. His face showed the marks of someone accustomed to people playing games with him, attempting to exploit his wealth. But this was different. The boy didn't flinch, didn't look away. "Malik, is it?" Bernard asked, his voice steady, though a trace of suspicion remained. The boy nodded. "Yes, I'm telling the truth. Please don't eat it," he said, his voice soft but insistent. Marissa released a harsh laugh, crossing her arms as she glared at Malik. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her tone frigid. "He's just some street child seeking attention. Are you really going to entertain this absurdity, Bernard?" But Bernard didn't respond to her. Instead, he lifted the spoon again, this time holding it closer to his face. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the quiet storm building within him. Marissa, he said slowly, his eyes meeting hers. You heard him. What exactly is happening here? Marissa's mask of composure cracked further, her lips pressing into a thin line. I can't believe you're even questioning me about that. It's offensive. She turned to the growing crowd, her voice rising. He's lying. Look at him. He probably doesn't even know who you are. Why would you trust him over me? The weight of her words hung in the air, but they didn't have the effect she'd hoped for. The crowd was murmuring now, their eyes darting between the three of them. Whispers floated through the air. Did she really do it? Look at her. She seems nervous. That boy doesn't look like he's making this up. The murmurs only fueled Marissa's fury. She slammed her hands on the table, her polished demeanor gone. Enough of this. Bernard, eat your damn soup and let's go, she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. But Malik wasn't backing down. He took another step forward, his fists clenched tightly. If you won't believe me, then call someone to test it, he said, his voice rising with urgency. You're wealthy. You have lawyers, doctors, people who can figure it out. But don't eat it. If you do, you'll regret it. Bernard's jaw tightened as he turned back to the bowl. The spoon was still in his hand, but he didn't lift it to his lips. His eyes, tired and calculating, shifted to his wife. Marissa, he said, his voice low. You've been acting strange for weeks. Now this. Her face flushed, and she stumbled over her words. I don't know what you're talking about. You can't seriously think I'd poison me, Bernard finished for her, his tone sharp. The crowd gasped audibly, their whispers growing louder. Malik stood firm, his gaze unwavering. He could feel his heart pounding, but he wouldn't let it show. He'd done what he could. Now it was up to Bernard to make the next move. Marissa straightened up, her expression hardening into something cold and unfamiliar. This is ridiculous. I don't have to sit here and listen to this nonsense, she said, grabbing her handbag. But before she could leave, Bernard's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength for a man his age. You're not going anywhere, he said firmly. Not until we get to the bottom of this. The waiter, who had been frozen in place, finally spoke up. Sir, should I call the police? The question sent a ripple through the café, and for the first time, Marissa looked genuinely panicked. She shook her head violently. Don't you dare. This is just a misunderstanding. Bernard, you can't seriously. But Bernard raised his hand, silencing her. Yes, he said, addressing the waiter without looking away from Marissa. Call them. Malik felt a surge of relief, but it was fleeting. The truth wasn't out yet, and the tension was far from over. The cafe held its collective breath as the waiter hurried inside to make the call. Bernard released Marissa's wrist, his eyes never leaving hers. The once polished charm she wore so effortlessly was now unraveling, replaced by a growing sense of desperation. She glanced around, her lips moving but no sound coming out, as though searching for an escape. Meanwhile, Malik stood a few steps back, his hands shaking slightly. He'd done all he could, but now he felt the weight of doubt creeping in. What if the man didn't believe him after all? What if she managed to talk her way out of this? He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay rooted in place. Malik, Bernard said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. You said you saw her put something in the soup. Can you describe it? The boy nodded quickly, stepping forward. It was a small bottle, like one you'd use for medicine, clear liquid. She poured it in when you were looking at your phone, then stirred it. I swear, I saw it. Bernard's face tightened. He turned to Marissa, who was already shaking her head. This is absurd. He's lying. Why would I? But Bernard cut her off. Why would he lie? What could he possibly gain from this? The crowd murmured again, and the sound of sirens in the distance added to the charged atmosphere. Marissa's eyes darted toward the sound, and for a split second, her carefully crafted facade slipped completely. She looked cornered. Then, as if grasping at straws, she rounded on Malik. "You've been spying on us, haven't you? Trying to cause trouble because you're jealous of people who actually have something?" The words hit Malik like a slap, but he stood his ground. "I'm not jealous," he said firmly. "I saw what I saw, and I couldn't just stand there and let you hurt him." The sirens grew louder, and soon 2 police officers entered the cafe. The room seemed to shrink as they approached the table, their hands resting on their belts. "What's going on here?" one of them asked, his tone neutral but authoritative. Bernard stood, his towering frame still commanding respect despite his age. "Officers, I need you to take a look at this," he said, gesturing toward the bowl of soup. "This boy claims my wife poisoned it." The officers exchanged glances, their expressions carefully blank. One of them leaned down, sniffing the bowl cautiously, then turned to Marissa. "Ma'am, do you have anything to say about this?" Her face turned crimson. "This is ridiculous. He's just a street kid trying to make trouble." "Bernard, you're really going to let this nonsense go this far?" But the officer wasn't buying her deflection. "We'll need to test the contents," he said, reaching for the bowl. "No!" Marissa snapped, her voice rising. The outburst drew even more attention, and her sudden panic only made her look guiltier. The officer paused, narrowing his eyes. "Ma'am, is there something you'd like to tell us before we proceed?" Marissa hesitated, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She looked at Bernard, then at the officers, her hands trembling as she clutched her handbag. Finally, her resolve crumbled. "Fine," she spat, her voice low but dripping with venom. "You want the truth? I'm tired of living in his shadow, tired of his control over everything. He was never supposed to make it past this year, and She stopped abruptly, realizing too late that she'd said too much. The cafe erupted in gasps, some patrons pulling out their phones to record the scene. Bernard's face went pale as the weight of her confession hit him like a truck. The officer stepped forward, his expression grim. "Ma'am, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted murder. Please put your hands where I can see them." Marissa's composure shattered completely. She screamed, trying to wriggle free as they secured her hands behind her back. "You don't understand. I deserved everything he had. Everything!" she shouted as they led her away, her voice echoing through the stunned cafe. Bernard sank back into his chair, his hand trembling as he pushed the soup away. For a moment he said nothing, his face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. Then his eyes found Malik, who stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. But as Bernard's gaze softened, a flicker of gratitude replaced the anger in his expression. Malik hadn't just saved his life, he'd revealed a truth Bernard would have never seen coming. The cafe slowly returned to a low hum of whispers and murmurs as the officers escorted Marissa out, her protests fading into the distance. Patrons exchanged wide-eyed glances, still reeling from what they had just witnessed. Some looked at Bernard with pity, others with curiosity. But Malik didn't move. He stood rooted to the spot, unsure if he was supposed to stay or slip away quietly. Bernard turned to the boy, his face still pale, but his eyes now steady. "Malik," he said softly, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Sit." Malik hesitated, glancing around at the onlookers, but Bernard's voice carried a weight that made him obey. Slowly, he sank into the chair, his shoulders tense. "You saved my life," Bernard said, his voice low but firm. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Malik fidgeted, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I couldn't let it happen," he said quietly. "I couldn't just watch and say nothing." Bernard nodded, his gaze distant for a moment, as if replaying the entire ordeal in his mind. "Most people would have," he said after a pause. They would have turned the other way, pretended they didn't see. But you didn't. That took courage, boy. Malik shrugged, his voice barely above a whisper. I guess. I don't like seeing people get hurt, that's all. Bernard leaned back, studying the boy. For the first time, he seemed to really see him, not just as a scrappy kid on the streets, but as someone with a story, a soul. How long have you been out here? The question caught Malik off guard. He looked away, his voice tinged with embarrassment. A while. Bernard frowned but didn't press. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black phone. Wait here, he said, standing and stepping aside to make a call. Malik watched him, unsure of what to do. His heart pounded with anxiety. Was he in trouble now? Was Bernard going to call someone to have him removed? But when Bernard returned, his expression was calm, almost kind. Help is on the way, he said simply. Help? Malik asked, his brow furrowing. Bernard nodded. I called someone I trust. They'll make sure you have a place to sleep tonight, somewhere safe. And if you'll let me, I'd like to do more than that. The boy's eyes widened. You don't have to do that, he said quickly, his voice defensive. I didn't do this for money or anything. Bernard smiled faintly. I know. That's why I want to help. You did something most people wouldn't have. And trust me, Malik, if the world had more people like you, it would be a much better place. For the first time in a long while, Malik felt a warmth he couldn't quite describe. He looked down, unsure of what to say. The cafe patrons began to disperse, but the weight of what had happened lingered in the air. Bernard picked up his glass of water, taking a long sip before speaking again. Sometimes life gives us the chance to change someone else's story, he said, his voice thoughtful. You changed mine today, Malik. And maybe, just maybe, I can help change yours. The boy glanced up at him, his dark eyes glistening with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. As the two sat in silence, the sun continued its arc across the sky, casting long shadows across the cafe. The lesson wasn't lost on anyone who had witnessed the event. Courage doesn't always wear a suit, and kindness doesn't always come from the wealthy. Sometimes it's the people we overlook who have the greatest strength of all. In the end, Malik's bravery didn't just save a life. It reminded everyone in that cafe of the power of standing up for what's right, no matter the odds. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us for more tales of courage, truth, and redemption. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that even small actions can create life-changing impacts.